Hey everybody, in my last Q&A video where I talked about whether or not proven winner plants were worth the extra money, I had touched on the topic of YouTubers getting free stuff. And it just so happens that 5 days after posting that video, I got a bunch of free stuff and it was from proven winners. But it didn't play out quite the way you might be thinking it did. So I'll get into that in a little bit, but what I'm going to do is address some of the other comments that you guys had put in, because there were a lot of incredible, insightful comments and discussions that went on in the comment section of that video, and I think it makes it worth giving a part 2 to that one. So I'm going to start with a comment from Grant Shue, and this one kind of puts things in perspective. So Grant writes, "Calm down everybody, they're plants. You can't fault a company for having good marketing and trying to make a good product. Do what works for you, try new things, and have some fun." And I think that's an important kind of perspective to have in this, because some people get really hot about this topic. So they feel really strongly against proven winners, or they are completely in love with proven winners and they go gaga over anything proven winners. And so let's just remember that, well, we're having this conversation that, hey, it's plants and whatever works for you does work for you. So I agree with Grant on that one. And D-Light writes, "I have no brand loyalty. I buy what is appealing to me and healthy." And that ties into what Desiree Layton wrote. "I contacted our nursery today about a pre-ordering date because of the unavailability of SUPERTUNIAS in particular last spring. I'm not brand specific, but rather supplier specific. I've seen gorgeous non-proven winner plants because the nursery put the time and care into them." And then Lori Miller wrote, "There's only a small amount of proven winners here in Southern California. A lot of times they look spindly compared to California growers that aren't branded. $2 more per small pot." And I think that's an important point for you to think about, because it does depend on the grower. So you can have the best plant in the world, and if it's not grown properly, it's not going to do well. So yeah, it is important that you buy what's healthy in your area as well. And going to a reputable nursery and talking to them about what plants are going to do well is going to help you make those decisions as well. And then there's a comment from Barbara McCann. She writes, "I live in Northwest Michigan, but stock up on proven winner annuals from greenhouses in the southeast portion of Michigan in spring for $3 to $4. My yard is so full of color now in early October, and last year I finally pulled the SUPERTUNIAS just before Halloween," which in northern Michigan is a long time. P.S. Many years ago I said proven winner plants are just too expensive. Now I'm a PW snob." And she mentions that she travels to her daughters in southeast Michigan in a second comment, and she finishes with, "By the way, a bulb crate," well, you know, the one of those big crates that you get bulbs in, "holds 15 4-inch containers and they can be stacked in my SUV." So she's even got it down to how she's going to stack them in the SUV, and I understand why she would do that, because at $3 to $4, it is worth the trip, especially if you're going down to visit your daughter. That's a fantastic price, because when I look at that, when I look at what it costs us to buy the plugs of plants, the soil, the proven winner pot, and the proven winner tag, we could not sell it. We can't even like grow it for $3. Like that doesn't even include labor, and we don't even get to $3. So it's incredible that this place can do that, but obviously they must be doing it with volume, or they're taking a loss or something. That's an incredible price. So hey, if you can find proven winner annuals for that price, go for it. That's unbelievable. I'm kind of jealous. Maybe I'll make a trip down to that part of, that'd be over by Detroit somewhere. So that's crazy. Colson writes, "I have a lot of proven winner shrubs and perennials and very much appreciate their excellent customer support. I've contacted them several times with a question I had about a shrub and always received a quick and caring response." And that's one thing that Proven Winners is really good about. If you go to their website and you have a question about one of their plants, they're very good about giving you advice or suggestions and helping you figure out how to care for it. A lot of times they'll refer you to the content that they've already created, either on YouTube or articles. So they are really good about that kind of thing, and not a lot of plant companies offer that kind of service. So that is nice. Meanwhile, TJ Sylar writes, "I enjoy videos from Walter's Gardens that explain the difference between their versions, which are marketed under proven winners, versus others. I have some good educational videos describing the varieties." And that is another good point, because both Walter's Gardens and then Spring Meadow, who does the proven winner shrubs, I think under the Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs YouTube channel, have a lot of incredible content. And they don't always just only talk about proven winners varieties, but lots of good tips on care. They also highlight different varieties, so it's a good way for you able to a lot of times see the plants growing, you know, in a landscape setting, or, you know, they'll just talk about specific characteristics of it. So it's very educational. I mentioned before the Gardening Simplified podcast, which is on YouTube, and that's put out by the Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs channel. But they also have another kind of segment that they call plant panel. And I've really grown to like this one because what it is people send in photos of problem areas of their yard, and then they have 3 people kind of give advice on what they would do. And they do the, where they put the picture up and then they draw over them and say, maybe try this here and try there. So you get kind of 3 different approaches to the same problem. So I really do like that channel as well. So that is under Proven Winner Color Choice Shrubs, and they have a playlist with all those on it, as well as the Gardening Simplified episodes. So those online resources that they put together are just absolutely incredible. They are really priceless as far as the amount of information you can get off of those. And MBH writes, one thing to keep in mind when buying Proven Winner plants, if you buy a labeled variety in one place, you can buy the same labeled in another location. And that's an important point as well. I think because they're a national brand and they are putting so much into marketing, that is really important to them. So that is true. But as mentioned before, different growers sometimes don't do as good a job, or if a plant is not being taken care of at its destination, like at a big box store, that can also impact the quality. So that all comes into play. B. Matlow writes, I buy Proven Winners perennials because of the plant guarantee. I've had a few that did not make it, but they were replaced with no hassles. And I want to emphasize that when it comes to plant guarantees and warranties, it really depends on the retailer. So that warranty is not being provided by Proven Winners, it's being provided by the retailer. So if you're buying from a garden center, it depends on what their policy is, and some have no warranty on them. Their goal is to sell you a good plant, and you follow the instructions on the tags, and you're probably going to have a really high chance of success. Meanwhile, if you buy from a big box store, they will have a different policy. If you buy online or if you buy from Proven Winners Direct, they're all going to have different policies. So do check that, especially if you're buying online. You're going to want to know what their replacement policy is or what their warranty is. It's going to be pretty important, but it is not provided by Proven Winners. So there's not a universal warranty on Proven Winner plants. Just want to make sure you know that, because I don't want you to get angry at a retailer that doesn't provide that, because when you purchased it, that wasn't included in what you bought. So wanted to make sure and clarify. Catherine D. Wong writes, Proven Winners also have a strong research and development, hybridization of their organization. And gbuniqueinterest writes, the main reason I buy Proven Winner plants is because of their breeding program. They are trying to get the most pest resistant, disease resistant, and invasiveness out of these plants. And that's an important thing to note, that as they're introducing new varieties, they're going to have characteristics that are kind of what people are looking for. So sometimes it is pest resistance, disease resistance. Sometimes it's about the growth or the color or the amount of flowers or the amount of petals or leaves or whatever it might be. But every new variety that comes out has kind of a purpose in all that. But that brings me to a question from Ivy Larson, who writes, Proven Winner plants, not worth it. Buy from your local native nursery. Use the Native Nursery Association of your state to find where they are. Natives are beautiful, support our ecosystem that we depend on, and have a long relationship with the climate and conditions of your soil. You are also supporting local folks and small nurseries when you buy native. So this is also another important point, because now Ivy, I think, would prefer we went all native, but the definition of native does vary as well. So I'm going to clarify that a little bit. So for some people, native is very specific. So it is basically the plants that grow specifically in your region. Some people are as specific as down to your county. A lot of people will say, native to my region, which is X number of miles from me, or in my state. Other people, like a lot of independent garden centers, have a much more general definition of native. So a lot of times it means it's a North American native, and that's pretty common, like on the Proven Winners website. And as mentioned in those other comments, the varieties that we're buying, like from Proven Winners and a lot of these other new varieties, they are hybridized, or they are, I think they'll use the word cultivars. So that means that there's selective breeding going on for these improvements. So some people are purists on that. Like, they don't want cultivars. They just want what's going to grow out in the prairie or out in the woods, and they want it to be the exact same type of plant. So there's a lot of variation in what people define, so you just need to decide what your definition of that. And I definitely agree with Ivy that I think there's space for both natives and some of these ornamentals in our yards and our gardens. A lot of times though, like, the native varieties might be a little too big or too wild. There are a lot of misconceptions too, that like all natives look really weedy, and that's where I think it's important that you go to one of these native nurseries. And a native nursery is not necessarily your local independent garden center. It's a little bit different than that. They're operating outside of the main network of like a lot of mainstream garden centers or regular garden centers because these native plants are a little bit harder to come by. A lot of times they're propagating them all themselves, or they're kind of trading among a really small group of local or regional type of growers. So that's an important thing to note, that they're a little bit different breed of retailer as far as nurseries go, but they're also usually very knowledgeable. So if you go there, you can learn so much from them about what natives are, and you can kind of talk to them like, you know, I need something that's going to bloom a long time, or, you know, something that's not going to cycle through. Remember, with natives though, they are not going to have all the same characteristics that we get in some of these, you know, new hybrids that are out there, and the, you know, the proven winter plants. So you have to change your expectations a little bit, but I think there's room for both of those in people's lives. So think about that. Ivy also recommended that you go to homegrownnationalpark.org to get a list of native plants for your region. And I went to that website. It's a really nice website. I didn't quite find the part where she mentions that you could put in your zip code and find plants. I didn't find that, but I did find a section where you put in the zip code and it shows you retailers or some of these native nurseries. And I think it would be a much better idea for you to just go to the nursery and find out what they have available, because you know, that's going to make it a lot easier for you to plan, and they're going to be able to talk really specifically about those plants. So if you're looking to do more like true natives, go to a native nursery. Meanwhile, if you have a more general definition of native, like you just want plants that are native to North America, or even, you know, something that's native to your region, the Proven Winners website does provide some of that information as well. So you can sort, or you can search by natives as well. So there are some options there. So keep that in mind. I'll go back to the to KPGB Unique Interests comment too, because they mentioned, I also feel like the big box stores get the lower end of the annuals and shrubs. I think they're referring to, you know, Proven Winners at Lowe's or Home Depot. And that can be the case, but usually it's not necessarily that they're getting the lower end. A lot of times it has to do with the fact that they're either getting younger plants, so sometimes they're younger or in smaller containers. Sometimes they're not being taken care of when they arrive at the store. And like, I just had a conversation with somebody recently who said, you know, early in the season I went to one of the big box stores and I was looking at shrubs, and when I picked it up, like when it was all, you know, grouped together, it looked good, but when I took it apart or pulled it out of the group, it looked really spindly and it was really tiny. And I noticed that too. Like when I go to some of the box stores, I look at those plants and the size of the container that they're in, and I think, you know what, that's what those plants look like when we put them to bed for the winter. And then we wouldn't actually sell that till like the following June. So it would have one whole winter and then, you know, the whole spring of growth. And so then when we're selling it, it's a lot larger plant, and a lot of times it's the same price. So it's the most common thing that I notice though, is like a lot of times like a Proven Winter plant is put in a big box store and they're in, you know, the 10-pack tray or whatever, and they're never spread. And if they're there for say a week and a half or 2 weeks, they start growing together. And if they start growing together, then when you pull it out, then you end up with this spindly, unattractive plant. And that's simply because you've got, you know, people who don't know how to take care of plants, or they don't have enough space, or that's just not their priority. So that's another thing to consider. And that's why I do like going to independent garden centers. And they just tend to take better care of those plants. I'd like to give some time to a comment from Liz Swinney, and she writes, this summer I bought $500 worth of Proven Winter plants. At $19.99 a plant, I was shocked, but had heard the plants were the best. I was very disappointed in the quality, not impressed, and won't buy them again. I'm in Northern California, Zone 9B. When I complained at the Ace store I bought them from, they just listened and said nothing. That's a tough situation, and I really feel for you, because that is so frustrating, especially when you're spending that much money on plants. You really do want to have some success on that. It's really, really frustrating. I don't know exactly what kind of plants you bought. Now I'm guessing at $19.99 each, they probably were perennials or really small shrubs. And one thing about perennials and shrubs is that, remember, we are buying those for the future. So there is a chance that, you know, they're not going to be like annuals where, you know, you're going to put them in, and as long as you fertilize them, they get huge in 1 year. A lot of times those annuals are going to kind of hang out for a while. So the first year they're going to look okay. The second year, hopefully they look a little better. And then a lot of times it's in the third year. Sometimes it's the fourth year, but usually it's that third year something people are calling us going like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this plant was going to be this beautiful. So that's something to consider. But if the plant quality from when you bought them and then you planted them and they just went downhill after that, that might be a little bit different situation. So it's a little tricky not knowing more information about the plants, but if someone came into our place in that situation, I would have a lot of questions to help them diagnose what happened, because clearly a lot of times, like in that situation, if somebody comes 2 weeks later, their plant's doing poorly, but we still have plants on the bench from that same batch that are doing great. Something happened from when they left us and they, in this point right now in your yard. So I usually start with, were there bugs, are there bug issues? And I love to be able to, see pictures of what's going on, because a lot of times those are good indicators. We can tell usually if it's bug, disease versus a watering issue. And watering tends to be the biggest problem when people freshly plant. So even if a plant is like drought tolerant, until it's established, it's not really drought tolerant, and watering becomes really important. Now, I don't know what Liz's experience is. She might be a very experienced gardener. She might not be. She may have gotten just plants that just were bad plants. They weren't going to do well. I don't know that situation, but I do know that here in Northern Michigan, and we're not nearly as hot as you are in 9B, was it, California? That's really hot. So what we find is that people will come in, and when we start asking about watering, some people do get a little offended. They're like, I know how to water. And so I'll ask them, well, I do want to know, like, so, you get your hose out and do you, put the water on it for 3 or 4 seconds? Do you do it for 10 seconds? And a lot of times they're like, oh, definitely 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Yeah, definitely 10 seconds. And that's when I'm like, okay, it's August 1st. We've had 90-degree temperatures. It's been windy every day and it's been pretty dry. 10 seconds actually isn't enough. And so I have to show them how to deep water, or explain to them the importance of deep watering in those conditions. And a lot of people just don't understand that. A lot of people also just water the leaves and they don't water the roots. And that's the important thing when you're watering. So actually the Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs YouTube page, they have some watering videos that are really good. And a lot of other YouTubers have done good videos on watering. So if that's a possibility that maybe it was a watering issue, or you had a big heat wave and it was really dry, and the new plants, even if they're the most drought tolerant plants in the world, if they aren't established and they don't have a good root system, they're not going to do well. So hopefully your plants didn't die and you're going to be able to see them improve next year. That is my hope. Now, if they were annual containers, the most likely cause is that they weren't getting enough water and fertilizer. That's usually the case. And in hotter temperatures, that's even more so. They need more water, and usually they say like fertilize every 3rd watering, and in order to be able to get that, like super performance from annuals. You don't do that kind of fertilizing though with perennials and shrubs. I want to make sure and clarify that, because a lot of people just give their perennials and shrubs way more fertilizer than they need. And that ties right in with a comment from Barbara Goller. Even with following instructions precisely, their Supertunias do not last in my Zone 8 location, as it gets extremely hot in July and August. However, I just ordered some perennials and I hope I have better outcomes with them. And I do hope that as well. Now, I will say I hear comments all the time on my petunia videos from people in California and Texas especially, who are like, Supertunias do not hold up in the heat. They are not going to make it. And it is true. They do struggle more in the heat. Now, if you go to the Dallas Arboretum, where it gets pretty hot there, they have beautiful displays of petunias, and they have said over and over again, because people are asking them all the time, like, how is this even possible? It's so hot here. And they just say it's really about constant water with those. And so it's probably more work than they're worth. So, they usually, they have it on drip and they're giving them fertilizer all the time. The average home gardener, isn't going to have drip on 2 or 3 times a day for those petunias to look good when they can have a more drought tolerant plant. And perennials are a really great way to go, because it is the type of thing where, once they're established, they can look great for a long, long time. And you're not investing that money every year. So I think you probably maybe made a good choice, especially in those hot conditions. And I hope you bought from a nursery that's local, that really knows your conditions, and we're able to talk you through it so that you're picking the right plant for the locations of your yard. So when you have the sunnier spots or a protected area that gets a little protection from the sun, you're going to do different plants, especially in those hot conditions. So good luck with that. I really do want to see you guys succeed. Honestly, I always kind of feel so bummed when I hear people didn't have a good luck with any plant, whether it's Proven Winners or anything else. Mando Cool writes, the only Proven Winner ones that I would say are maybe worth the money are Bubblegum and Snowdrift. Those are Supertunia Vistas. The other ones suck. And to be honest with you, those actually wouldn't be my picks for the best Proven Winner annuals, the ones that I can't find a substitution for. But everybody has their favorites. And there are alternatives out there. And this goes right in with something from Maynard Greenhouses. And she writes, great subject, Corey. I could write a book on my opinion on growing and selling Proven Winners. You're right. Living close enough to Pleasant View in New England, this area is saturated with their product. I have slowly started to cut back on them. We used to be solely proven winners years ago, but have found others that are better, and I can grow them in the pots we've used for decades. Doesn't have to grow them in the proven winner white pots. It's too bad that other plant companies like Duman, Syngenta, Ball, and Cicada, to name a few, don't do much marketing outside the grower industry. And that's the case with a lot of the traditional plant marketing has always been to retailers and to growers rather than to like the public. And so that's where Proven Winners has kind of changed things a lot by offering or marketing directly to the public. And I don't think that's necessarily like a marketing decision. I think it really reveals a change in the market because a lot more people are doing their research online. They're much more DIY. And so Proven Winners is providing the information directly to them, and then they go out hunting for the plants that they want, whether they're Proven Winners or not. So I think it really is an indicator because compared to 20 years ago when people would come in, I mean, people, when they would shop with us, used to come in and they would see what we had, or they would talk to us about what we had, and then they would plan their landscape. These days, people come in and they've spent hours and hours and hours like online and looking at lists. And one of the biggest problems with the lists that they find is like, especially if they're looking for specific conditions. So they're like, oh, I'm trying to solve a problem like erosion control. And so they find a list of plants for erosion control, and it ends up, it's a list from Florida or from New Mexico or something. And that becomes a big problem because there's like no way that all those plants are going to do well in our area. So then we have to tell them, well, that plant won't do well here. And they get a little frustrated with that. I'm starting to get low light because the sun's starting to go down. So I might have to relocate. Maybe I'll do that right now just so that I do it while it's still light out. Otherwise I'm going to be moving around in the dark. So I'll be right back. I forget how early it gets dark this time of year. I have not adjusted to this. So fortunately now I have enough light that I can finish reading Maynard Greenhouse's comment. And she continues to write, as far as Proven Winners, I do prefer certain plants like Brawalia, Evolvulus, Bacopa Giant Snowflake with Verbena's Whiteout and Sparkling Amethyst and Violet Ice we tried this year, and they were gorgeous. I really cherry picked the best ones. I could not live without Supertunia Bordeaux and Royal Velvet, probably one of their top sellers besides Bubblegum, which is often too large to grow with other plants nicely. And you know what? I think Maynard Greenhouses and I need to do a team up this winter where we talk about like our favorite varieties of proven winter plants that we don't think we can find an alternative to, as well as our favorite alternatives. I'm totally game for that. So Maynard Greenhouse is like, have your people call my people, which basically means send me an email because I don't have people. But I think it could be a really interesting little team up. So I'd love it if you could do that. But I think this is how it is for a lot of growers and a lot of people in your gardens. You have your favorites, as Mando Cool also has, and you don't want to look at other varieties. But also I think that's part of the reason why people watch channels like this one, because you know they want to see how these plants perform, because you can't try every variety. It's too expensive and you can't always get them. So you like to find out which ones are worth hunting for and putting the effort and money into. So that's that. Now I'm going to move on to Linda Freeman. For the most part, I like proven winter shrubs and perennials. The problem is not being able to find much of a variety in my area. I have had to order them online, and I have mixed feelings about that because they're more expensive and do not arrive in the best shape, but I do get the plant that I want. What I have found is most of the time the reason they don't arrive in good condition is because they have been just potted up and not well rooted, so there are no roots to hold the soil during shipping. And this is one of the frustrations with shopping online, is that you know sometimes the plants are small, sometimes they're not good. And she actually says in here, like, she's probably had better luck buying, like if she has a choice between a quart and maybe a gallon size shrub, she often just gets the quart because it seems like the gallon size is just a quart when planted into that, you know, and they're not well rooted. But she has tried different companies, and there is a difference in the quality of the plants depending on the company. So if you do buy from one company and you're not happy with it, you know, they usually have some kind of return policy or warranty. Try another company if you want. It might be worth it for you, but it is tricky because shipping is so expensive, and the plants that come from those places, I mean, it's just an expensive process. And so if you know, but sometimes if you really want that plant, that's the only way to do it. And here's one from Jill Hahn. I'm growing my garden with plants for both attracting pollinators and appealing to the human eyes. I only tried Proven Winner's Supertunia Vista Bubblegum once, and it did fabulously good, but 0 pollinators visited and stayed for its nectar. My local nursery owner told me that's because the Supertunia's genes have been hybridized for looks only and no longer produce nectar for bees and hummingbirds. And I think this is An important one for me to talk about, because I've heard this comment from people in many different ways about many different plants regarding proven winners. And I always wonder, like, where does this come from? Because, like, if you're going to a nursery and those nursery owners grow plants, I would think that they would have a different answer for this, because when they're hybridizing these plants or they're doing this selective breeding, yes, they're selecting them to have certain characteristics or to reduce certain characteristics. And there is a chance that certain varieties will be less appealing to pollinators. Just that's going to be the nature, you know, that it was more important to have one characteristic over another. But for that to be kind of said as kind of a blanket statement, that's not really true. I've had my bubblegum vistas and they've had pollinators on them. It might be also that your garden just has a lot of alternatives. So it's kind of like going to the buffet and like you see the noodle salad and you're like, I'm going to eat everything else first, and the noodle salad's going to be the last thing I'll go to. So that may be the case. But I was trying to think, like, why would nursery owners be really defaulting to this? Well, you know, Proven Winners is breeding out all the good stuff for it, you know. Now granted, there's a lot of new technology being introduced into this and it's an innovative field, but they're not skipping over all those other parts. And like I said, some plants may be less appealing to pollinators in their hybridized version, but as I thought about it, I thought, you know, part of it might be when Proven Winners is marketing some of these plants, they'll often use the word sterile variety. And the reason why we would want a sterile variety when it comes to like annuals, sterile varieties tend to produce more flowers and they produce them for a longer period of time. So they say sterile variety and that's supposed to make you think, okay, that means it's going to flower more. Meanwhile, with like perennials and shrubs, a lot of times they're breeding sterile varieties because it's an invasive variety. So by having a sterile variety, it means it's no longer invasive. But the word sterile is a bit of a misnomer, because the plant that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't reproduce naturally like the other plants like it do. A lot of times it just means it, you know, sometimes it produces its seeds very, very late. So it has a very long period of time where it looks good and then it finally goes to seed really, really late. Or if it does produce seed, it produces very little seed or not viable seed, so the seed wouldn't germinate, or the percentage of seeds that are going to germinate is so low that it reduces the risk of it being an invasive plant anymore, because it has such little chance of being able to take that it no longer is considered an invasive variety. So I think there might be a little bit of a misinterpretation of the word sterile. That's just my theory on it. Also, there are some nurseries that, because they have other varieties, they default to, and this isn't any business, they default to talking negatively about the brands that they don't sell. So if they're not selling a Proven Winner plant, they might, you know, just say like, oh, you know, they're the evil whatever and they're doing whatever. So that might be what's happening there. I don't know what the story is. And I think sometimes these people might not only be misinterpreting the word sterile, but they also might not be realizing that a lot of the new varieties have been kind of produced in the exact same way as these Proven Winner varieties. So any of the new petunias could potentially be less attractive to pollinators, or they may be more attractive to pollinators depending on the specific variety and what kind of line of the plant it comes from and all of that. So there's a little bit more to it than just that. So I don't think it's a simple answer, and it's certainly not an answer where you can just say, hey, you know, Proven Winner is just breeding everything out of it, because they're not skipping steps in a plant's natural cycle. I mean, these are still plants and they're still going to go through many of the same processes. They just sometimes are bred to be able to kind of work through that a little bit differently than their parent varieties would. And we hear from Lorinda Christine, where I am, the prices seem to be about the same. Quality of performance does vary. My biggest concern with Proven Winners is them possibly saturating the market and pushing out smaller growers. And I can understand that concern. The competition for plants is pretty strong right now. And so I'm not sure that Proven Winners, although they seem like a dominating marketing source, I think when you look at like the percentage of Proven Winner plants out there versus other plants, they have grown, but I don't know that they're overtaking the world, and I agree that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. Now, if your concern is also about them kind of pushing out smaller growers and going to big box stores, Proven Winners at this point is like right at about 25% of their businesses with big box stores, and the rest is with independent garden centers and growers. And now when they say growers, there might be some growers that are growing for big box stores. I'm not sure, I never did clarify that information with them, but they are pretty committed to independent garden centers, because I think because of the nature of their kind of plants being premium plants, they do rely on knowledgeable people at independent garden centers talking to customers and being able to talk about the differences between each plant. And I also know that they are very committed to their growers and their retailers. And I say that simply because not only do we have our sales rep for each of their areas, so whether it's perennials, shrubs, annuals, caladiums, we have different sales reps for each of those. We also have kind of like a retail resource group that we can tap into. So there's like a Facebook group, but they actually have staff that are specifically committed to working with retailers and helping us with things like, hey, signage and marketing materials, and not just for necessarily proven winner stuff. They will help us with whatever we're trying to do, as long as it ties into the proven winner products as well. So they're really good about that. Like in our specific rep for our region, her name's Jessica, and I had a really good conversation with her recently at what was called a Proven Winners Roadshow. And this is not having anything to do with YouTube, but it is something for retailers and growers that Proven Winner puts on. They invite us to just an all-day event. We get to see new plants, new products, talk about some of the programs that they have, a lot of industry talk as well, and they feed us a good meal and all that kind of stuff. And it was at that event where I was talking to Jessica, who represents our region, and I actually came to her with questions that you guys had put on YouTube, and I just wanted to hear what her reaction was to some of the things. And she didn't really say anything that surprised me or that I wasn't expecting, or things that I didn't already know, but it was good to hear someone else's kind of perspective. And also she came from that Proven Winners school, so I kept thinking like, okay, what kind of Proven Winners packaged marketing message am I get? But it was really pretty straightforward. The way she answered it was very similar to maybe the way I would have answered it. And then we were just talking about maybe some of the things that I cover on YouTube. And I did talk to her about the fact that I really do like to test plants and compare plants and different things like that. And I mentioned that next year I was thinking I would like to do a fertilizer comparison where I grow plants side by side, and I try, like the Miracle Grow and the Proven Winners fertilizer and the Beat Your Neighbor fertilizer and maybe Jack's or something like that, and try these different fertilizers, side by side, and see if there is a difference and if we notice anything. And she just immediately said, oh, you know what, I'm going to just give you the fertilizer right now. We'd love to be a part of it. And it was interesting because we had just been in a session where they were talking about merchandising and things like that. And one of the things they said is like, hey, really make sure that your customers are educated on fertilizer for annuals, because in order for Proven Winner plants to do really well, they do require, fertilizer. You can't just neglect that part of it. And they kept saying to us, like, we don't care what fertilizer. It can be our fertilizer. It can be whatever your favorite fertilizer is. That's what we want you to sell them, because if you have success with it, then they're going to have success with it. You're going to be confident selling it. They're going to be confident using it, and they're going to have more success. And I think that was the key thing. And that's something that, Jessica reflected back to me. She said, I can tell your goal is to make people better gardeners, and that's the most important thing. And okay, so she was stroking my ego a little, I'm going to be honest, but she was really realistic, and she's, really down to earth. So, I'm not like, falling into some kind of trance or anything. I'm still who I have been for forever. So don't worry about that. But it does bring me to some other topics. Like Austin to Boston says, thank you so much for posting this. Several channels I watch create unrealistic expectations because they're getting tons of plants for free or at a discount, and the average gardener can't purchase the thousands of dollars they are planting. It's very off-putting, and I am beginning to despise watching them get free plants, free trips, etc. I don't know if this is going to make you feel any better when I talk maybe about my perspective from this, but the first thing I want you to realize is that most people on YouTube are not getting thousands of dollars of plants for free. The fact is, usually those marketing departments that are providing the free plants, they have a pretty specific idea of what plants they want promoted and they want talked about online. And so usually it's like new varieties that are available, or they'll send out a couple of samples of those plants. Like they're not sending enough to do a whole row here or a whole bunch of plants over there, or to redo your whole garden. That in general doesn't happen. Now it may, I don't know what each YouTuber has for relationships. And of course, the bigger the audience, a very, very large audience, the sky's the limit as to what they could get for free. But for the most part, most YouTubers are not getting, thousands and thousands of plants for free. However, a lot of them are YouTube partners, and so they're getting paid for their content. So if they're like me, they're putting whatever money they make from YouTube into getting more plants. So there's a little bit of a different thing, where YouTube becomes almost a bit of a business, or it becomes kind of something that just the snake that eats its tail, where it's just, whatever you make, you put back into it. So it's important to note that. And I also want to mention, like, nothing is really free on YouTube when it comes down to it. So if a brand is offering a content creator something for free, there is a bit of an expectation that something will come of it. And I know we try to make it look easy when we're creating these videos, but there is a lot of work and a lot of behind the scenes stuff happening to make YouTube happen. Even the most casual YouTuber has to put a lot of time into things. And so there is work being put in. So in some ways, when somebody's reviewing a product, they're not really, getting it for free. Usually the expectation is that they will talk about it. Now, a lot of times though, you have these situations where the YouTubers are only talking about products that they get for free, and that becomes a little bit weird. I have a little bit of a history with content creation that goes beyond maybe what you guys know about. So from 2006 to 2020, I hosted a travel podcast and blog, and it became pretty well known. We were consistently in the top 100 of iTunes, actually cracking the top 10 several times as well. And I had worked with a lot of brands, and this is, 2006 is like the early days of the internet. It's, that's the way back machine. And so at that time, working with creators, brands working with creators was a very new thing. It was very unusual. And the industries of travel, food, and at that time we were calling it mommy blogging, so parent blogging and parent content, were the first ones that brands really were starting to reach out to, and there was those relationships being built. And then quickly beauty and fashion came in and totally changed the industry. But being in that kind of segment at the time when these brands were experimenting, and brands had no idea how to pick people. A lot of times it was like a weird numbers game, and sometimes they were, it was strange because like in travel, we always used to laugh because there'd be like these people who did this budget travel backpacking type of blog and podcast or YouTube channel, and they would do all this budgety stuff, but they had a really big audience, and so all these luxury brands were giving them money to come stay at their luxury resort. And it was actually quite entertaining to watch these budget travelers, like their first time at a luxury resort, but I don't think that they were really reaching the audience that brand had intended or that they were hoping to get, but they ended up having good content or interesting content nonetheless. But so it was an interesting time, but it was also a time when the issue of disclosure became really important, because early on, a lot of people never talked about what they got for free and did they get it for free. And actually, even the general media, like a lot of those magazines that you'd get, they usually didn't mention that, oh yeah, Procter & Gamble sent us all this stuff for free, and they're also advertising in our, magazine, and we're talking about it and telling you this is one of the best products on the market. So, there has been some of the trust that has been compromised over the years, but at that time, there really was a lot of focus on that disclosure, and I think a lot of that has carried over. In fact, YouTube insists that if we have a paid promotion, that we have to disclose that. So, and that'll appear, they have it now built in where it's going to appear on your video and stuff like that. So it's a kind of a different world than it was then, but at the same time, those brand relations were still there. And on my podcast and blog, I went full guns, and I had sponsorships, and I had display ads on the website and ads in the different podcasts and all that kind of stuff. And it was doing well. I was making a good amount of money every month, but for me, it was just a lot of work. So when I got this YouTube channel, now to be honest, it started in 2020, and we really started it to be able to talk to our customers because we weren't able to open to the public. But once it was clear that the audience expanded past our region, I kind of had to make the decision of like, hey, how do I maneuver through this, and who am I talking to? Because I'm no longer talking to people who live within 60 miles from here. So at that point, I kind of said, I really don't want to have advertisements. That's not what I want. And doing that, I think, has built an audience, and I am a YouTube partner, so YouTube does give me a share of ad revenue from the ads that play in the videos, and it's become a decent part-time job for me. And so I do really appreciate that. And it also has made me, though, evaluate, because I do get offers from brands quite often. Right now, it seems like every luxury outdoor furniture brand wants me to try their furniture. And as much as I would love to be able to get free furniture, it's not where I want what I want to talk about. I mean, I'm not going to give up time talking about plants to talk about that furniture, at least not this point in my life. It's not where I want to be. And I just feel like I'd be kind of jumping the shark a little bit on that. So I'm not doing that, but it does bring me to things like these twist and plant augers that I gotten at the Proven Winners Roadshow. So granted, they gave me this stuff not because they want me to talk about it on YouTube. They gave it to me because they want us to sell it in our store. What was interesting is when I was talking to Jessica, the one thing we were talking about is that I said, I don't necessarily want to just talk about your auger. I want to compare your auger. And, she was like, yeah, that's exactly what people want to see too. So my feeling is that when I get free stuff, I want to do it as a comparison. So I already ordered a couple of competing augers, some really cheap ones as well. And I just want to see how they actually compare. I mean, is this worth it? Because I'm sure this is a premium one. I'm sure it's more expensive than the $20 one that I bought online. There were even some for even cheaper. But yeah, anyway, that's a separate video. What am I doing? So anyway, that's where my head is at with this kind of thing. Every YouTuber is a little bit different, but I do want to remind you that there is work going on behind the scenes with that kind of stuff. So there's more to it than just they're getting all this free stuff and they're living in the lap of luxury. I think most YouTubers are not. So just want to say that. Also had a comment from Sarah Lee. She writes, I wish some of the big YouTubers didn't seem so pigeonholed into just this brand. Wouldn't it be great if they planted some Proven Winner shrubs and some Southern Living shrubs and compared them? The Southerner's Northern Gardener seems to use a variety of brands, and I really like his channel. And that's Matthew, and Matthew has a really great channel. That one, again, is called Southerner's Northern Gardener, and he does do a lot of like first editions. He has some of the Southern Living ones. He has some Proven Winner plants, and he's doing a really good job of getting a really broad variety, and he, like me, likes to do those comparisons. So he has all kinds of macrophylla hydrangeas planted, all in a grouping, so they're all growing side by side under the same conditions. And so I like that kind of stuff. So I would recommend checking him out. He's doing a great job. And I don't know if he gets plants for free or not, but he is doing these comparisons. So I don't feel like he's like locked into a brand at all. So I think he's a good one to watch. I agree with you, Sarah. And then Garden Doodles writes, we've always had a lot of success with Proven Winners, and they are probably the best in their field. We have gone with cheaper annuals a few times and regretted doing that every time because they just didn't perform. The difference was pretty obvious. We now stick with Proven Winners. For larger shrubs and perennials, we don't really notice a major difference. We've almost stopped watching a lot of channels though because we just couldn't relate anymore after seeing how they can pack so many varieties of plants into their garden and have their own warehouse to plant nonstop. It can be fun to see, but it sort of became less relatable. And I guess I could say that kind of happens, but the good thing is that there's always new content creators coming out. It's just that sometimes the smaller creators are harder to find. They just don't appear in your search or your feed. So I would recommend just kind of mixing up your feed and doing some searches for plants and that type of thing, or other gardeners and that type of thing, and seeing what can be out there. Because I sometimes think about that when I'm doing my annual plantings, because I planted 50 containers this year, and the value of those containers, like at retail, would have been probably over $3,000. And there's no way I could normally afford $3,000. Now I have the advantage of my parents own this nursery, so I have access to a lot of plants, and so I do get a good discount from my parents as well. So I'm very lucky on that. And they also look at it as some marketing for them, because in addition to the global audience, there is a local audience that watches my videos as well. So those people actually come in and buy. So I'm lucky that way, but I do think about that sometimes where I'm like, oh, not everybody can just say like, well, do I want to do a color rush petunia or do I want to go and do a supertunia? I know that that's not how things go. So I hope I don't become unrelatable for people, but this is where I'm at in things right now. And I hope to continue and still provide really great content for a long time. But, if I become unrelatable, you might have to give me a reality check. How does that sound? And I'm going to finish up with a comment from Darla S. She writes, I'm new to gardening just this year. I bought what I liked and none of them were Proven Winners. I used tips I learned from your channel and a few others, and everything did well except my violas and morning glories that I seeded along my fence. The information you share is invaluable to us. And that is a wonderful comment. I appreciate the compliment, but I really want to commend you for giving gardening a try and having the success that you did. Even though you had some failures, I like your attitude here where you're like, hey, had 2 things that didn't work, but most of the stuff did great. And I love the fact that you're willing to do this research and you seem to be absorbing the information, whether it's from me or from other sources. I think that's just really tells a lot about you more than it does about us as YouTubers, that you sought us out and you're actually applying what you're learning. I couldn't ask for a better viewer. So I really do appreciate it, Darla, and all of you guys. I really do appreciate your comments. I appreciate your interaction. And hey, we're coming down to the end of the season, and there was somebody who had asked a question before about, hey, whatever happened to those submissions that you asked us to put in with our annuals and stuff? I am saving a lot of stuff for winter because we're getting to the point where I'm not going to have a lot of outdoor and plant stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So I am kind of saving a lot of that stuff for later. So I will have stuff through the winter. I got a lot in the works. So hopefully I can keep producing lots of videos that you guys are going to appreciate, and let me know if there's certain things that you think would be good topics to cover. So leave a comment. Thank you guys very much. This probably was a little bit of a long video. Thanks for hanging in there. I do appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.